Hello and welcome to Lesson 10, which focuses on Chapter 12, Gender, Sex, and Sexuality. So, this is an important area of research in sociology. It really gets us to the um, area where we're looking at inequality. So, one of the big things that sociologists study is why are people treated different, and that can be related to social class, it can be related to gender, it can be related to race and ethnicity. So this week we'll take a look at gender. So I want to clarify a couple things here. So let's kind of get into this. Let me get back to where we need to be. So the reason, as I just mentioned, that we really look at gender, this notion of gender, is um, this idea of gender stratification. And gender stratification means separation into groups. And so what we see in our society, in all societies, is that male and females have unequal access to property, to power, and to prestige. Um, in practice, what this means is that um, women are a minority group. They have less power, less property, and less prestige than men. And this is something that surely you've seen in society, and if not, you're going to get some examples here in a minute. So let's separate the two important concepts here. People oftentimes use these things interchangeably. I'm sorry, I gotta go through this. People oftentimes use these two concepts interchangeably. Is this concept of gender and sex? They're not the same thing. Sex is related to our physiological characteristics. In other words, sex are those characteristics that we're born with. Gender, on the other hand, and this silly kind of T-shirt I think actually does a good job of this. Gender is actually how we think. In other ways, it's the expectations we have on people based upon their physical sex. So, um, the sexes, those biological characteristics. So the two terms that we would use for sex are female and male. Those are the two terms we would use for it. And so I'll just give you sort of the short of this. Sociologists do not view men and women as inherently different. We don't have the whole men are from Mars, women are from Venus sort of perspective on sex and gender. In fact, sociologists will tell you that most of the reason that men and women are different is because we are trained or socialized to be different. So let's take a look here at gender. Gender, therefore, are social characteristics. Gender is learned behavior. So um, the terms associated with gender would be masculine and feminine. So think about it this way. You probably know as a child that boys and girls are treated differently. And we make the assumption that they're treated differently because they want different things. But is that actually true? And um, one of the things that, to kind of sort of bring it in perspective, if you think about it, I was born in Massillon, Ohio. And I was born at Massillon Community Hospital back when it was Massillon Community Hospital. And if you don't know, what they used to do at Massillon Community Hospital is every time a boy was born in the hospital, they gave him a little football. So what we saw was this early socialization. Literally, the first sort of message delivered to a child in this situation is that you have a boy, he's going to play football. Additionally, you've probably seen this and been associated with this. We have certain colors that we give away to infants. Boys get the blue, girls get pink. If you're unsure, you go with a neutral yellow or green. There's all these rules in which we're already starting to socialize people into different things. We're teaching people what our culture says is acceptable. So be very cautious on this, people. Let me warn you, gender is not inherent. It is not natural. That is, masculinity and femininity are not natural states of men and women. They are trained states or socialized states. So they're taught. Okay, so why are we looking at this? I mean, what's the point? And at the end of the day, um, the reason that this matters in regards to sex and gender is that we have men and women, males and females, are treated differently based upon their sex and gender, really. So we have some serious issues that exist in society. Now, I want to just show you a couple of the realms in which men and women are treated differently. So we'll take a look here, for example, at education, at politics, at women in the workforce, and overall sort of inequality. So let's take a look here at education. So in education, we have sort of an interesting thing going on in the United States. Um, Historically, women were closed off to education. And what I mean is that education was not as available for women as it was for men. Specifically, college education, but even sort of high school education back in the old days. It just wasn't seen as important for women as it was for men. Now, globally, this is still true. Um, Two-thirds of the world's illiterates, those people who cannot read or write, are actually women. Now, if everything was sort of equal, we would expect that to be 50-50. It's not, it's two-thirds. So that means women are much more likely to not be taught how to read or write. Now, that's certainly true if you look around. This shows you the darker the color here, the more inequality in education there is, if you can't actually make it out. So, the lighter colors, like the United States and Canada here, generally means that both men and women, boys and girls, are learning how to read and write. So this is actually measuring primary school attendance. However, the reason that we see around the world that more women are less likely to learn how to read or write is there are places in the world, specifically here through Central Africa, into India here, there are places in the world where women are less likely to get education. And that is, it's just still not seen as appropriate for women. Now, one of the interesting things in the United States, and if you've been in a face-to-face class here at Stark State, you've certainly noticed this, is that we actually see more women in college than we see men. That is, this is nationwide, about 57% of the college population are women, and this is very reflective of Stark State as well, where there are certainly more women than there are men. So if there's one sort of shining area, or that is an area where we're seeing a lot of improvement, this would be the one as far as inequality goes. Now, where we're still seeing problems at, those areas where we still see big gaps here. Politics is one, and so politics has a lot of outcomes. And what I mean is, if you are if you are going into politics, if you have a lot of women in politics, you can expect to see that your society will be more responsive to concerns that perhaps women have. So, I'll just give you an example. In some of the countries where they're closer to a 50-50 representation of women in politics, you're much more likely to see things like free childcare, good quality childcare provided by the state, you're much more likely to see parental leave, not just maternal leave, but paternal leave as well. In many places, it can be up to a year of paid leave from your work. Certainly not something we see in the United States. Now, in the United States, um, what percentage of our national politicians, so Congress people and senators, are actually women? And, we would expect if everything was equal, that would be 50%. But in fact, the percentage of national politicians that are actually women is right around 20%. So this is an area in which we still see a lot of inequality. Now, one of the primary reasons for this may be the sort of educational differences going back here between men and women. So even though there are more women in college now, women were oftentimes in different career fields than men. We gendered our career fields. We had career fields that were seen as women's career fields, like nursing and education, and career fields that were generally seen as males, like doctoring, certainly back in the old days, engineering. And another one of those that was a male career field historically was law. So becoming a lawyer. Um, Most politicians have a background in law. That is, most politicians are lawyers. And there's lots of jokes about that, of course, but I'll stay away from those right now. Um, so this is an area in which we see men and women treated differently. Um, Perhaps the most important for men and women here in this inequality is women in the workforce. So this is something we call the gender gap. And I just want to show you this. Hopefully you can make it out. I know it may not come out perfect on your screen, but hopefully you can see this. Um, what we see here is a blue line that shows you average earnings of men in the United States who are working. In addition, the red line shows average earnings of women in the United States who are in the workforce. Now, if you can't make out the numbers, what you can surely at least see is that men make more than women. And there's a percentage in the middle here that tells you what percentage of a man's income is a woman making. And so if you look at these percentages, you can see that going back to 1960, when men on average made $5,400 a year, women made $3,200 a year, that was 61%. So women earned 61% of what men earned. As you jump forward, you see that by the early 1990s, it was at 71%. That is, women made 20,000, men made 28,000. So women were earning 71% of what men were earning. But that number has generally stayed the same in the upper 60s, low 70s since that time. What that means is that the gender gap in income is not closing. So ideally, over time, we'd like to see these two lines come together. That is, women in the workforce and men in the workforce should be earning about the same amount of money, and that's not been the case. So we do have this gender gap. So be sure to read up about that because there's a lot more information on that there. One thing that really affects women, this can affect any group, but we typically see it talked about with women, is this notion of the glass ceiling. And this helps explain in part some of the reason for the gender gap. What we see are that women are in certain companies, in certain businesses, in certain jobs, they are not being promoted to the very top. Now, a business that has a glass ceiling, women may be working there. They may get some promotions, assistant manager up to manager, but you may eventually hit this glass ceiling. It's glass because you can't see it. You don't know it's there, but you may not get promoted to the top, even if you're the most qualified candidate. part of this and kind of think of this as the old boys network. Um, Many of sort of these traditional businesses, men have always been at the top, so they don't really perhaps maybe like the idea of women. Maybe they don't think women are as qualified. Whatever the reason is, and discrimination here, preconceived notions and stereotypes, whatever the reason is, in many places there's a glass ceiling, and so women are not being promoted when perhaps they should be. A couple of companies have really taken some flack over this. Notably, Walmart was sued because of this glass ceiling that it was said that Walmart had. Um, think about an education. Think back to your elementary school days. You probably had a majority of female teachers. As probably most of your teachers in elementary school were women. Um, but think back to your principals when you were in elementary school. And when I do this in the classroom, almost everyone, the majority of their teachers were women, but at least half of students say, oh, wait, but my principal, that is the person at the top, was actually a male. So that is changing in education, certainly in K through 12 education, but in the old days that was definitely the case. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of bring up some of these ideas of gender inequality. Of course, get into the chapter. There's a lot we talk about that I haven't gotten on here in regards to gender and sex. Also, sexuality, which is an extremely important part of this discussion. So I'll let you get that stuff out of the chapter. I'll let you review the PowerPoint. And as always, keep up the good work, and I'll see you in the discussion forums. Have a good week.